my life is so filled with twists and things. Just as, let's say, in Arnold.
In the world of cinema, some stories remain hidden long after the cameras stop rolling. The Karate Kid became a cultural phenomenon, and Pat's role as Mr. Miyagi cemented him as a legend. But behind the scene, whispers of tension, secrets, and untold truths haunted the set for decades. Before his passing, Pat himself finally broke his silence, confirming what really happened when the world wasn't watching.
Every time my name came up in the casting submittal process, he was adamant. He says, I don't want a comedian. I don't want a comic actor for this role. This is a heavyweight part. I want an actor.
What he revealed changed everything fans thought they knew about the film. So what was so powerful that he waited until the very end to say it? Join us as we uncover more. Pat Morita and the Karate Kid. When the Karate Kid premiered in 1984, no one could have predicted that it would become one of the most enduring films of the decade, or that a Japanese-American comedian named Pat Morita would rise to global fame as the wise, soft-spoken Mr. Miyagi. Before this role, Morita was best known for his comedy work.
Like this suit, eh? It's my black suit.
Including appearances on Happy Days, and he had been typecast as a humorous, supporting character. But as Mr. Miyagi, the maintenance man with a hidden mastery of karate, Morita redefined himself, creating a mentor figure that transcended the screen. You won't believe what the cast later revealed about him. The film itself was a blend of classic underdog storytelling and martial arts mystique. It followed Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio, a teenager struggling to adjust after moving to a new town. Bullied by classmates trained in a brutal form of karate, Daniel finds an unlikely protector in Mr. Miyagi, who teaches him discipline, balance, and the famous wax-on, wax-off philosophy. Upon its release, The Karate Kid became both a critical and commercial success, grossing over $130 million worldwide and earning Morita an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, something nearly unheard of for an Asian American actor at the time. But while the movie seemed smooth and polished to audiences behind the scenes, the atmosphere on set carried its own stories and small legends. The cast and crew often recalled the contrast between Morita's naturally comedic personality and Miyagi's stoic, almost spiritual demeanor. Morita himself admitted that the transition was difficult. He had to fight to keep his natural humor in check, while also working to perfect an accent that the studio insisted upon. There were also lighter, often retold anecdotes. How Morita struggled with the chopsticks fly-catching scene because of the technical setup, or how the cast bonded over long hours of training for the climactic tournament. Ralph Macchio, much younger and greener in the industry, often referred to Morita as a second father figure, though their bond was not immediate. It grew gradually during filming. These early stories, sometimes playful, sometimes poignant, helped build the mythology of the Karate Kid as more than just another Hollywood hit. They created a sense that what happened behind the cameras was as meaningful as what played out on screen. And it is within these whispered recollections and anecdotes that rumors began to grow, transforming from simple set folklore into mysterious tales that fans still debate decades later. As with many iconic films, The Karate Kid was not immune to rumor and speculation. Over the years, whispers emerged about tension between cast members, odd behavior on set, and conflicts with producers that were never fully substantiated. That's not the end of the story. One of the most persistent claims was that Morita struggled with being taken seriously in the role. Some alleged that studio executives doubted his ability to portray the gravitas of Mr. Miyagi, given his background in comedy. This, according to the stories, created friction between Morita and certain members of the production team. Others have suggested that his insistence on authenticity, pushing for cultural details to be respected, sometimes put him at odds with the producers, who were more concerned with commercial appeal than accuracy. Another tale centered on Morita's acting process. While he was not known for being a method actor, some accounts painted him as deliberately keeping a distance from younger cast members in order to strengthen the on-screen mentor-student relationship. Ralph Macchio later disputed this, recalling warm off-camera interactions. Still, the notion of Morita as a distant, austere figure persisted, despite contrasting testimonies. Then there were the wilder stories, claims that Morita would slip into heavy drinking after long shoots, or that clashes erupted between him and director John G. Avildsen over how much humor Miyagi should have. None of these stories were ever confirmed, and in interviews, Morita often brushed them aside with a laugh, preferring not to feed speculation. But perhaps the most intriguing rumor was one so persistent that many fans came to believe it outright. It involved a supposed falling out between Morita and Ralph Macchio, with some claiming that their mentor-student chemistry on screen masked real-life friction. For years, both actors denied this, stressing their mutual respect. Yet whispers continued, fueled by the idea that Morita's quiet intensity might have clashed with Macchio's youthful energy. Keep watching to find out more. Pat Morita's health and final years, the confession. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Pat Morita's life had begun to slow down in ways he couldn't ignore. The man who had once juggled television roles, film projects, and a busy comedy schedule was now grappling with fragile health. Years of drinking had taken their toll, and though he often masked it behind humor and charisma, friends and family noticed his struggles. Morita battled kidney and liver problems, underwent hospitalizations, and grew visibly weaker as the years went by. It was during this time that he seemed to become more aware of his own mortality. Once quick with jokes and evasions when asked about serious matters, Morita began reflecting more openly on his career, his fame, and the personal demons he had carried quietly for decades. He knew that the clock was ticking, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to speak more freely about his experiences, both the celebrated and the painful. It gets more interesting. Fans and interviewers began to notice the shift. Morita's later public appearances often carried a touch of melancholy beneath his warm humor. He spoke candidly about the challenges of being an Asian American actor in Hollywood, the stereotypes he was forced to play, and the gratitude he nonetheless felt for the breakout role of Mr. Miyagi. He was aware that he had become a cultural icon, but he was also conscious of how that fame boxed him in. As he aged, he wanted people to see beyond the wise mentor, to remember Pat Morita, the man, not just Mr. Miyagi, the character. Behind the scenes, those close to him described a man both reflective and restless. Old friends said he often reminisced about The Karate Kid, not just the films themselves, but the extraordinary way they had impacted generations. Children who grew up in broken homes or without role models would write to him, saying Miyagi had been the father figure they never had. This touched Morita deeply, and as he entered his final years, he seemed more willing than ever to discuss what the role had meant, not just for audiences, but for him personally. Yet, along with the gratitude came a willingness to revisit the darker corners of his past. Stories that he had once laughed off or deflected began to creep into his conversations. He spoke more openly about the battles with alcoholism that had shadowed his career, the doubts that haunted him even at the height of his fame, and the toll that constant typecasting had taken on his self-esteem. It wasn't just in interviews. Friends noticed that Morita seemed determined to set the record straight, sometimes in small conversations at home. sometimes when reconnecting with old colleagues. He seemed to want to clear the fog of half-truths and rumors that had grown around him over the years. Some of these stories were light-hearted, like clarifying that he had, in fact, needed multiple takes for the infamous fly-catching scene with chopsticks. But others were heavier, touching on professional conflicts and deeply personal struggles that he had long kept private. As his health declined, Morita's need to unburden himself grew stronger. He began reaching out to people he trusted, old friends, fellow actors, even former colleagues from the Karate Kid days. It was as though he sensed that if he didn't speak now, the truth might vanish with him. And then, in his final years, something unexpected happened. Pat chose to confide in someone privately about one of the most persistent rumors surrounding him, a story he had always brushed off in public. He didn't just address it casually, he revealed details that stunned the person he spoke to, shifting how they saw both the man and the myth he had carried for decades. It did not happen in a grand televised interview or a staged press conference. Instead, it began in the kind of setting where most secrets slip out, an intimate conversation recorded later in fragments between Morita and someone he trusted deeply. For decades, speculation had swirled around his time on The Karate Kid. Fans and industry insiders had built a patchwork of rumors, some harmless, others potentially damaging. Morita had always played the role of the affable denier, laughing them off with wit, his humor disarming enough to silence probing questions. But in that private exchange, he set humor aside. His voice was weak, his cadence slower than the rapid-fire punchlines people remembered, yet there was a weight in his words that signaled he was finally ready to tell the story. The subject turned, as it inevitably did, to Ralph Macchio and their on-screen bond. He described the beginning of production, when he and Macchio barely connected. He was in his early 50s, carrying the exhaustion of a long career that had not, always, treated him kindly. Macchio was barely out of his teens, full of nervous energy and still learning how to navigate the film industry. Their personalities clashed at first, the seasoned comedian trying to transform into a stoic master, and the wide-eyed newcomer trying to prove himself. There had been distance, even frustration during those first weeks. Here's the shocking twist. Marita acknowledged that the gap between them was noticeable to those on set. Crew members speculated, producers whispered, and soon, a rumor took shape that the two could barely stand each other. That was the story that lived on for decades, long after the reality had shifted. Because as Marita explained, something changed during filming. The more time they spent together, the more their bond grew. Long shooting days, shared meals, and the natural rhythm of the mentor-student roles slowly bled into real life. By the time the film wrapped, what had started as awkward detachment had transformed into genuine respect and affection. And yet Morita admitted that he had allowed the public to believe otherwise for years. He had laughed at the rumor, denied it in passing, but he had never gone into detail about those first weeks of tension. In this moment of confession, he seemed almost relieved to admit it. He described it not as animosity, but as a slow, warming process, one that ultimately made the performances more authentic. Daniel and Miyagi were not instantly close either. They grew into their relationship, just as the actors had. What stunned his confidant was not just the confirmation of the rumor, but the vulnerability in how Morita expressed it. He admitted that he had feared audiences would be disappointed to know that the bond did not begin as magically as it appeared on screen. For years, he had carried that secret, worried that pulling back the curtain might tarnish the legend. Now, in the twilight of his life, he saw it differently. To him, it was proof that the magic of cinema was not always instant. Sometimes, it was forged through struggle, patience, and eventual trust. You won't believe what happened next. The confidant later recalled how Morita's eyes softened when he spoke of Ralph. Despite the rocky start, there was no bitterness in his voice, only gratitude. He considered their relationship one of the most meaningful of his career. He made it clear that any early tension had been fleeting, overshadowed by the years of friendship and admiration that followed. This was the confession that he had never shared publicly in such detail. It was not scandalous in the tabloid sense, but it was powerful. It revealed the human imperfections behind a relationship that had been idealized by millions. For decades, fans believed either in total harmony or total discord. The truth, as Morita finally admitted, was somewhere in between. It began with unease, but it blossomed into something genuine. That single admission reshaped how those who heard it understood both the actor and the film itself. His late-life confession forced a reckoning: what had really happened on set, and what had simply been rumor polished by time. Take, for instance, the persistent story that Morita clashed constantly with director John G. Avildsen. The popular version painted heated arguments over Mr. Miyagi's balance of humor and wisdom. In reality, Morita clarified that while there were spirited discussions, they were hardly the dramatic blow-ups people imagined. Avildsen pushed for restraint in Miyagi's delivery, often reminding Morita to slow down, to embrace stillness, to let silence do the work. At times, this frustrated the naturally comedic actor, who was used to filling pauses with quick timing. But according to Morita, those exchanges were professional disagreements rather than personal conflicts. The truth was far less explosive. They respected each other, even if their creative instincts diverged. Another long-standing myth suggested that Morita insisted on a method approach, staying in character as Miyagi even when cameras stopped rolling. Stories circulated of him remaining silent and austere off-set, avoiding interaction with cast members. Yet Morita himself dismissed this. He admitted that while he sometimes created a little distance at first, it was not method acting. It was self-doubt. He worried that slipping into his usual playful personality between takes would make it harder to summon Miyagi's calm gravitas on cue. Once he gained confidence, the distance melted away. The idea of him being cold or unapproachable off-camera, he insisted, was never true. Then there was the claim that his relationship with Ralph Macchio was fractured throughout production. This was the most persistent rumor of all. One Morita finally confirmed had a kernel of truth only in the beginning. The myth had been exaggerated into something it never was. Their bond did not begin as effortless, but it grew into the authentic friendship that audiences sensed on screen. The reality was not conflict, but evolution. The comparison between perception and reality was striking. Where the myths painted him as temperamental, distant, or unreliable, the truth revealed a man navigating insecurity, cultural pressure, and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He was flawed, yes, but far from the caricature the rumors had created. Voices from the set, cast and crew reactions. When Pat Morita's private confession came to light, many turned to those who had been there from the beginning. Would the people who lived through the making of the Karate Kid confirm or deny the stories he had finally addressed? Ralph Macchio, who had long defended Morita against speculation, echoed the sentiment that their relationship was a slow burn rather than an instant bond. In interviews, he described their early days as cautious, but he insisted that the respect between them only deepened with time. For Macchio, the notion of lasting animosity was laughable. He maintained that Morita was both a mentor and a friend, long after the cameras stopped rolling. There's more. Director John G. Avildsen also weighed in, reflecting on his dynamic with Morita. He admitted that he often pushed Pat towards subtlety, reminding him that Miyagi's strength came from stillness, not theatrics, but he was quick to dismiss the idea of heated clashes. To Avildsen, their discussions were part of the creative process, and he credited Morita for embracing the discipline that elevated the role into something timeless. Other cast members shared similar memories. William Zabka, who played Johnny Lawrence, remembered Morita as approachable and encouraging, never the aloof figure some rumors had suggested. Crew members likewise spoke of his humor between takes, recalling how he lightened the mood during grueling shoot days. The revelation of Morita's confession, paired with corroboration from those who worked alongside him, shifted how fans and historians now view both the actor and the film. Far from diminishing his legacy, the confession humanized it. The acknowledgement of early friction with Ralph Macchio made their on-screen chemistry more poignant, not less. Audiences could now appreciate that the relationship between Daniel and Miyagi was not pure invention. It was a mirror of the actor's own evolving dynamic, starting with unease, then building toward genuine trust. This reframing also cast new light on the message of the Karate Kid. The film was never just about karate, it was about resilience, patience, and growth. Knowing that Morita himself experienced these lessons on set deepened the film's resonance. The wax-on, wax-off philosophy suddenly felt less like a scripted teaching and more like a reflection of the actor's real journey. At the same time, the rumors about clashes with Avildsen, method acting, and drinking habits no longer lived in the realm of gossip. They were contextualized, clarified, and in some cases, dismantled. Fans began to see Morita not as a flawless legend, but as a man who overcame obstacles to deliver one of cinema's most iconic performances. That nuance only strengthened the respect for him. The legacy of the Karate Kid itself was also reshaped. It was no longer just the story of a bullied teenager finding strength through mentorship. It became, in part, a story about the making of the film, about how the cast and crew wrestled with their own challenges while creating something that transcended them. Do you think there are still untold secrets from the set we may never know? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You'll love it.